Thank you for coming out to attend the pilot webinar discussing youth climate activism in Saskatoon, put out by the SYCC Youth Climate Committee.
Hi, we're the Saskatoon Youth Climate Committee, and this is our first webinar. We are a group of youth in Saskatoon who are fighting for climate justice, and we do that by working with local governments, other community organizations, students, and schools.
Yeah, I'm Natalie. I'm 17. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm in grade 12 at Tommy Douglas. I first became really passionate about climate change in outdoor school last year, which gave me the opportunity to really connect with the planet and just find so much beauty in it. And it really made me care about the earth. And now I continue to advocate for climate change because I feel that the health risks with climate change are really kind of not talked about too often. And so as a hopeful future healthcare worker, that's really important to me and something I really care about spreading information about.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm 15. I use she, her pronouns. I've been a climate activist for the past 2 years. I've always been really passionate about environmental issues, and growing up, nature was a huge part of my life with camping, fishing, canoeing, all those kinds of things. I first became involved in climate activism through Off the Grid at Tommy Douglas, and since then I have spoke at and organized strikes. I have become a co-founder of this committee. I have become a plaintiff in the LaRose vs. Her Majesty the Queen lawsuit against the federal government. And I've also worked a lot on issues around the Northeast Swale, watershed protection, pollinators, glacier loss, and youth involvement in politics.
Okay, hello, my name is Elizabeth, but everybody calls me Lizzie, so whichever you prefer. I use she, her pronouns. I'm 18 and I'm in grade 12 at Centennial Collegiate. I as well have always been really connected to the environment. I am fortunate enough to live by the Northeast Swale and the grasslands, so I spend a lot of my time exploring those areas and biking through there. I was also a part of a grade 7-8 canoe club, and I really found that I connected to the Churchill River when I was part of that club, and I have always had a special place in my heart for that place. And of course, I was also part of the Outdoor School 2019 group, and I got to revisit Churchill and some amazing other places here in Saskatchewan. And having that connection to those green spaces has really made me want to keep those green spaces healthy and there for everyone else and future generations to experience them like I have.
Hi, I'm Quinn. I'm 18. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns. I am in grade 12 at Aiden Bowman Collegiate, and I've always been really interested in environmental issues. I've always been really connected to nature, like through my childhood, and I started getting involved in environmental activism with the Fridays for Future strikes. I'd done like online activism, but Fridays for Future was the first time I got like involved in real life, and also through this committee, which has been really great. And I think it's really important that youth voices are heard, especially for the environmental movement, because the impacts are really something that our generation is going to have to deal with more than anyone else. So.
And also, who couldn't be here today, but Warsha is another member of this group. And
hey guys, I'm so sorry that I can't be there, but hopefully these pre-recorded messages find you and can be integrated somewhat smoothly into the webinar. So, with the introduction, I'm Warsha and I'm a grade 11 student from Walter Murray Collegiate. I first became really passionate about climate justice in grade 8 when we started our sustainability unit. The unit was accompanied by a lot of field trips out in nature and at the Brightwater Learning Center, which became one of my favorite spaces to learn, and some really cool projects like designing blueprints for tiny houses, learning about vermicomposting, native species, and a really exciting eco-fair led by some students to encourage more sustainable practices at school. Later, I also started to get more involved with climate strikes and learning about all the different ideas involved in climate justice. And I'm also really interested in conservation because I've always really enjoyed spending time outdoors And I think people may tend to discredit Saskatchewan for not being as exciting, but we've got so many beautiful spaces and really unique prairie and wetland ecosystems that are super biodiverse, really exciting, and just places of warmth and beauty that just really personally helped me get into a really reflective and inspired mindset, especially as you sort of learn to realize that things out in nature aren't that different from us, and there are so many interconnected links and relationships throughout natural systems, and there's also so many things that we can learn from holding nature closer to our hearts.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
Michael, Ben, do you guys want to introduce yourselves or no?
You bet. Sorry, I thought you first. Yeah, my name is Michael. I'm a teacher here in Saskatoon at with the Off the Grid Climate program out of Tommy Douglas Collegiate, and yeah, I'm an ally of this program because I think it's fantastic to see so many youth involved in these issues and taking charge of the future that's theirs to control. So yeah, looking for more and more opportunities for youth to be pushing for change in the city and in the province and the country.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm also a teacher here in Saskatoon. Just to kind of mirror what Michael said, it's really, really important that youth in the city are speaking up, especially with the state of the ecosystem that we belong to that not many people know about. So I think it's really important that you guys are leading the way and doing such a great job of what you're doing and doing things like this and making it public knowledge. So really excited to hear what you guys have to say today.
Great. So we have, normally for whenever we have newcomers come into a group, to the group, we usually have them introduce themselves and then say a little bit about their background. So there'll be an opportunity for that for our next webinar series. But for now, for the folks that are gathered in the meeting today, what does it mean to be an activist to you?
So being an activist, there's really not one way to be one. That's the core of this definition, that you could find it in a dictionary, but it can't look one way. It's different for every single person. So advocating for the social change that you believe in, for political change, and how you feel that the world could be better, and how you want to advocate to make the world a better place.
I think that when a lot of people think about activism, they think about going to protest and standing up against police and all these really crazy things, when it's really not always that. It can be little meetings like this and just really truly being passionate and caring about something that you want to make a difference in.
To me, being an activist is about having my voice be heard and helping to, like, using my voice in any platforms I have to help others be heard also.
I think being an activist is largely leading by example. In a way, you have to practice what you preach. You can do all of the public demonstrations and online advocacy you want, but it's really important to make sure you live your life with positive intentions, albeit imperfectly. I think there's this really big pressure to any kind of activism and any kind of activist to be perfect, and that their change and their voice only matters if they're doing the perfect ideal lifestyle, especially surrounding environmental issues. But it's okay to live imperfectly. If anything, it's more important that we show that side, because those little changes make the biggest difference when everyone participates in them. And I just like to say there's a quote by Shilbizzle. She is a YouTuber who advocates for sustainable lifestyles and zero waste swaps. And she says, "You cannot do all the good the world needs, but the world needs all the good that you can do." And I think that's a quote that everyone should try and live by, especially when it comes to environmental advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Totally
and
agree.
for our committee, we're also big advocates for intersectionality when approaching the climate crisis, realizing that until all of these issues are solved, we will not fully be successful, and that all issues around oppression are connected, especially within the climate crisis. and everyone is affected differently, but there are people who are affected more, and that's disproportionate, and it's something that we really need to address as a whole issue. And that's one thing that we're really passionate about, is we're not just environmental activists, we're activists for all sorts of different groups, and we believe in holistic change.
Really good. I think that people are generally led to feel that they're individuals, and especially with young people, meant to feel like they can't promote very much change just by themselves, or even just from their age. But why, in this world where usually an older demographic of people are the ones making the calls in political worlds, why are young voices so important to be heard at this time?
Well, the thing that we usually get caught up in is the fact that we didn't create this crisis, but we're the ones that will have to deal with it. So a lot of us wouldn't have had as much of a contribution to creating the climate crisis and to feeding into these systems of oppression that have led to such difficult future for us, and that have fed into a system that we need to fix. And this will be our problem to bear. So a lot of the time we like to pass the blame to older generations, but the truth is, in every generation there have been people who are fighting for the planet, especially Indigenous leaders fighting for environmental protection, and that they and all of their work before us has really helped lead us to here, no matter what shortfalls and things like that have created this crisis and left it on our shoulders.
We all have a responsibility in the perpetuation of the climate crisis and in the solution of the climate crisis. And young voices are really important because, I mean, kids are the future. Like, you know, maybe not all of us can vote yet, but we will be voting someday. And like, it's important to listen to young people because we'll be the ones making decisions pretty soon. And I think that it can be difficult for to be heard because, you know, we don't have the political power to create like systemic change, and so it's hard to be heard over the voices that are in charge. And I don't know if that made any sense.
I think it's also really important that we're encouraging our youth to speak up so that we do feel like our voices matter, so that when we do grow up and we can enter these positions of power, that we feel inspired to do so, and we feel like we can make change and we can inspire a movement of, a positive impact.
I think it's also important to mention our generation seems to have the most access to information that's current and up to date. We have access to online files, news, all kinds of media ways to connect with experts and other people who are interested in any kind of movement. And we also have specialized programs. I mean, me and Natalie were both in outdoor school and Lauren was in off-grid. So in those areas, we also learn and experience and get to explore topics that our parents probably didn't and older generations weren't aware of at the time. And now we're seeing the impacts of not being aware of those things. So I think it's really important that our voices are heard because we do have that information accessible to us. And it's also, this is kind of a personal story, but it's a little bit sad how we understand the urgency and the crisis that climate change is posing to humanity. I've had discussions with friends about, do we want to have kids because of the state of the planet? Not because we don't want to, not because we're not sure, but simply because of the state of our environment. And I think it's really important that our voices are heard and we do make change, because no kid should be having to think about that this early in life simply because the planet wasn't being taken care of in previous generations.
Yeah, and a lot of what happens too is trying to pass the buck of whose problem is this, and addressing the climate crisis as a future problem instead of the fact that it is impacting lives right now, and we know that it won't only continue, it will worsen. So we're really calling for leaders to recognize that they can't keep pushing it off or saying, oh no, we'll do that next year, or this can wait. And youth are incredibly passionate. They understand the urgency of this issue, and they're willing to fight for their future. So we're really committed to making change happen as a generation.
Yeah, I think it's important. We align the ideas and motives behind making changes, and those who do have political power make decisions kind of based on, I guess you could relate it to the First Nations 7 generations belief. All the decisions were made in a way that would positively impact 7 generations down the line, rather than just the one that is here right now. And I think that's really important, that we consider how our decisions these days are going to impact our futures.
Like, truly, climate change is everybody's issue because it's going to affect all of our lives. And so it's really important that everyone, regardless of their age or their gender or their race or whatever, it's really important that we're all speaking up about it, because we've seen in this last year how people banding together can truly spread so much awareness on a topic.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
The climate crisis is like the one issue that does not discriminate. It is everyone's problem.
And I think, as the International Governmental Panel on Climate Change announces, how many years are left until irreversible damage is done, there's still that timeline where youth today are going to be in positions of power in the near future, that they can make positive changes and have a huge influence. And they already are. Youth around the world are already doing so many things. And but I think people often see tackling climate change as such a larger, broad thing to be fighting. But for you, what are individual passions of yours that you kind of take more of an interest in and maybe follow a little bit more closely?
Yeah, so maybe, we each have these issues that are really, really important to us, that we have either a special interest in, that have impacted our life in different ways, or that we're just really passionate about. So I think we'll start with Natalie, if you want.
Yeah, for sure. So I did a little bit of research on our glaciers in Western Canada, which are obviously super beautiful. So there's glaciers all over Canada, and the melting glaciers are something that's often associated with climate change, but we don't really know how it's affecting our life here in the prairies. And so in Alberta and BC and Yukon, there's many great glaciers, and it's estimated that 80% of them will completely disappear due to climate change within the next 50 years. And when this happens, it's going to have a huge effect on the ecosystems, the water supply, the agriculture, and the tourism industries there. And we obviously don't have any glaciers here in Saskatchewan, but we do have one named after us in Banff National Park. And that's where the North Saskatchewan River gets the main water source for. And that's where we get our drinking water, our water to take showers. It is super important that we're getting that water supply from that glacier in Alberta. And so as that's melting very quickly, we're gonna see higher water levels in the river, which could lead to flooding and slumping in our river areas, and as well as chemicals that we use to dispose of in these glaciers, we're gonna see resurface. And there's one that's shortened to DDT. It used to be used as a pesticide, and it can cause various cancer, that negative effect on us. And as well, they are super harmful to our aquatic wildlife. And so we're gonna really have this huge negative impact on our lives and our marine wildlife. And so we should be really protecting these areas because they're also protecting us. Glaciers are reflecting light off the earth, and they're helping us not absorb all this light that contributes to global warming. And so, yeah, we should be all trying to help these glaciers.
Yeah, and this is an issue that I'm also really passionate about because I was able to do my main research project for Off the Grid on this topic. So I actually got the chance to go to Jasper and visit the Athabasca Glacier, which then feeds the Bow River, which directly flows into the South Saskatchewan River. So they're not isolated issues. All of our water supply does in some way depend on having that glacier access to fresh water. So using them not only as a water supply, but acknowledging all of their other contributions to our health and safety, and just how much everything in our world would be affected as they continue to be lost.
Mhm. Like, I mean, water is like what keeps us alive. It really, like, it doesn't get more important than that.
Yeah, water is life. So
Mhm.
It's right up there with just regular oxygen.
Yeah.
Okay, so for my personal issue, I chose the Northeast Swale, which is something that I have been lucky enough to visit multiple times and interact with and have all of those firsthand experiences, as well as being able to acknowledge the importance to all of our biodiversity and to our watershed. So the Northeast Swale is a piece of native grassland prairie in the Evergreen neighborhood and beyond of Saskatoon. So you might have walked there or biked there, and it's overall just an amazing place to visit. So natural prairie grass is becoming increasingly rare, and to have this area of protected grassland is really important, not only for preserving all of those different species and for that type of ecosystem that it allows, it also has several wetland components. And this leads to it being a very biodiverse area and just an incredible place to experience and for all of the animals that call it home. So there's also a lot of cool things like large limestone caches and fossils that you can check out, and overall it's just an amazing area. It's home to a lot of endangered species like the crowfoot violet or the northern leopard frog, and as well as other species that are not endangered and that simply call that place home. It's also a flood reserve, so acting to protect us from excess weather, a key piece of our watershed to filter out toxins and to allow healthy levels of water to be flowing into all of our different water systems. But unfortunately, it is quite threatened, especially now. So the proposed Saskatoon Freeway would cut through the swale, and aside from all of the effects of that being developed, of physically putting a road through that area, there'd also be things that once that road is built, it would be used constantly, and mostly by long haul trucks and trailers, and things that would be producing a lot of emissions, and that also can lead to things like litter and all those kinds of things, aside from the issue of human development and developing an area that is so sensitive and is so essential. And then things like urban sprawl and other human development are also a huge threat. So it's a really pressing issue right now, and you can contact your elected officials to voice your support of the swale and keep on fighting for it.
So, Lauren, I know you are going to be talking about the Northeast Swale, and just connecting to that, I wanted to talk briefly about biodiversity for my individual passion. So in 2019, the United Nations conducted a biodiversity report and actually found that healthy ecosystems were dwindling at really, really alarming rates, and that spaces of biodiversity were becoming more and more endangered. The report even went as far as to say that I believe about 1 million plant and animal species were being threatened by extinction. And it also talked about how the majority of land-based habitats with native prairie were also decreasing by 20%. And the Saskatchewan Environmental Society also has been playing a really big and important role in preserving biodiversity and also trying to introduce new biodiversity policy throughout Saskatchewan, which is really interesting to look at. Native prairie it itself is actually a really unique ecosystem that we have here in Saskatchewan and all around the world that is known for being extremely biodiverse and also resilient. But it's also, unfortunately, one of the most threatened and endangered ecosystems around the world. So to understand native prairie better, it's basically just referring to a grassland ecosystem in which land is remaining in its natural state. And it's also a space that can provide home to a lot of plants and wildlife and riparian areas like wetlands and streams. And unfortunately, today there are so many things that we can look at that are impacting this ecosystem, such as agriculture, introduction of invasive species, climate change, and also urbanization. So the Saskatchewan Environmental Society has done a lot of really interesting work around this, which includes outlining 3 main ideas in their policy initiatives that they put out. And those include A, a need to focus on increasing protected areas, B, wetlands preservation, and C, reducing our overall greenhouse gas emissions. They've also been doing a lot of work regarding protecting the southern portion of the Great Sand Hills, and also working to establish ecological reserves, such as the community pasture system and the Great Sand Hills, and also just in general, putting out more protected areas and also being conscious of not only preserving what we have left, but also helping it grow and regenerate as well, so it's available for future generations. They've also been doing some interesting work with cosmetic pesticides, which I believe they've outlined to be found in 90% of wetlands tested in Saskatchewan, and just have been focusing on the idea that what we put on our lawns and in spaces throughout the city is actually being cycled back into our ecosystem and impacting various different species. And with that, sort of the last thing I want to touch on briefly with this topic is just the idea of stewardship and what we can do moving forwards. And I personally truly believe that one of the most important things we can do is care about nature and work on sustaining mutually beneficial relationships with nature in which not just one group is benefiting. But I think we can also do a much better job at learning from the people and also the diverse systems around us. So like Indigenous groups, elders, and leaders who have a really close and healthy relationship with the land. And just through that, learn to be very open to treating nature with respect. And again, always approaching all of these different issues with both open perspectives and also open hearts.
I was just wondering, Lauren, if you could give anybody any information on insecticides and pesticides and how those impact the swale, because I know those are a large polluter in that area of the city.
Yeah, so one thing a lot of people don't understand is that our watershed, it's all connected. So what you spray on your lawn or on your tree or whatever, it gets washed down into our watershed, which then flows down into our water system with rainwater. So all of those toxins getting into an area like the swale can have a catastrophic impact. So things, and really pesticides, they're meant to kill whatever they're targeted towards. So having those be introduced to an area that is sensitive and high biodiversity can lead to a whole bunch of problems for the species that live there, for the land itself, and for the water.
So basically, if you can help it, avoid using pesticides and insecticides that have lots of chemicals in them, and try and find greener ways to deal with pests, or simply leave it be.
Yeah, urban fertilizers are also a huge part of that. So the fertilizer you put on your lawn does end up in the groundwater. So just be conscious around that too.
So like, would good alternatives to urban fertilizer be like composting? Would that be better? Does that sort of work the same way?
Yeah, so having natural things like encouraging pollinators in your garden or something where you might be using fertilizers or pesticides or whatever. And yeah, exploring options like compost that are natural, don't contain toxins, and don't have to be produced and put in a bottle and shipped and have all those other things associated with it. So it's all really connected.
Does anyone know of any alternatives to pesticides that are not as bad? If not, that's okay. I'm just curious.
Pesticides are a bit trickier.
Sure,
so having things, like different kinds of pollinators and encouraging things like ladybugs or ways that you can try and protect your garden, or simply letting some of them be and realizing that you don't have to have a perfectly manicured lawn that it is still a natural space.
Yeah. Lawn culture is really bad for the environment. This is like off topic, but it is. Let it grow.
Yeah.
Let bugs into your garden.
I think also another way that green areas in our city is really important is like how vital getting outside and spending times in our natural area is for your mental health. It's really good for you to spend this time in these places. It's really good.
Yeah, there's a lot of hidden gems out there, and a lot of people think, well, Saskatchewan's just kind of flat. There's probably not a lot to do, but all the Meewasin trails are within a short drive from our city, and there's so many great things to explore. So if you think there's nothing there, you're not looking hard enough.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Cool. I think oftentimes people see Saskatchewan as this big emitter and maybe a place that's not necessarily capable of jumping on the renewable energy train, but I guess, can any of you speak to kind of some hopeful parts of Saskatchewan? Or
what I had prepared for my sort of personal interestful thing is actually directly related to that. I was going to talk about Saskatchewan's potential for solar energy production. So right now, Saskatchewan is ranked as the number 12 province for installing solar power system. So I'm pretty sure the only province we're doing better than is Nunavut, and that's because they have none of it. I actually don't know, but sorry. So we're second last in terms of our implementation of solar power technology, despite being the best province for sunlight levels. So, for example, we get more sunshine hours than any other province at over 1,300 hours annually, and that's a lot of sun. And we have really, 2/3 of the province is very sparsely populated. Like the overwhelming majority of people live in the southernmost third, and there's a lot of empty space that's exposed to sunlight all year. And I think that a really great way to implement renewable energy is to put more solar farms, or like in Ontario a few years ago, or no, the programs are closed now, but they used to have programs where they could rent space on your roof, and then for you to put a solar panel, and then they would pay you back for the energy you produced. And I think that that's a really great idea, because not only are we utilizing the useless roof space that you're not doing anything with, but also it helps generate revenue for homeowners and businesses. And if anyone's been following the price of oil right now, it's non-renewable energy is not profitable anymore. And it costs about it, if you've seen the gas prices, they're really, really low. And I think that with COVID, things are really going to change after this, because they can't go back to normal, but normal wasn't working. But it costs the same to use renewable energy as it does to use non-renewable. And I'm really hoping that the tide is going to change. And sorry, I've gotten off topic, but as a case study, I looked at Cowessess First Nation, and they implemented this really awesome renewable energy project in 2018. They created a hybrid form of wind power and solar energy, and it creates a more stable supply of energy. And just by adding solar panels to an existing wind turbine, and it's been coined as possibly the first hybrid of wind and solar power project ever in Canada. And it's really neat, and it's expected to last for 35 years, which is a very long time. And they're like, Cowessess First Nation is really like hoping to share new technology and innovation with the rest of the province. The project aligns with Indigenous beliefs to protect the land and resources for future generations, and it offers a way for the community to develop new businesses and jobs in energy development, and it's provided some new employment opportunities for Cowessess citizens, and they've partnered with Sask Power to sell some of their excess power back to them, and it provides a long-term revenue stream for the community and helps the community achieve the goal of self-sustainability. And it's just mutually beneficial to everyone involved. And the project, I mean, it was fairly expensive. I think it was around $6.5 million in total. But I mean, also in the 2019-2020 fiscal year, the budget for the energy sector in the government was $2.7 billion. So I mean, that's like the money's there to put the systems in place. And I just think that it's such a neat project, and it's such a great idea to involve community in generating their own energy, and to help specifically Indigenous and rural communities in gaining some self-sustainability, and to move Saskatchewan into more renewable energy and taking advantage of how much sunlight we get here.
Yeah, and one of the main arguments that I always hear is, well, we could be using that space for something else. And their main backup is agriculture. But there are areas of our province that are not currently being used, or that aren't totally usable for things like agriculture, for pastures, or for having those kinds of things. So the space is there, and it's really just a matter of really integrating that into what we already have, and then eventually moving on completely.
Yeah, and on the note of agriculture, like installing solar panel, like switching to renewable energy is would be really helpful for agriculture, because climate change really negatively impacts agriculture. Like, it causes drought and water stress, and ecosystems become less resilient with large temperature change and more extreme weather, harsher conditions, less precipitation, and drier soil. And I would have to imagine that it would degrade the quality of the soil and the nutrients and whatever. So, I just think that like it would benefit everyone to switch to renewable energy, and like not just as an environmental activist, like also as someone who lives in the society, participates in politics, and also for the economy.
Yeah, and
it's more sustainable, and it will be more profitable, like moving forward. I'm certain.
Yeah, and this is something that, again, people are not connecting the dots, or they're saying, well, it's just been a few weird years with freak weather or wrong seasons. But if you remember last year in October, we had a really early frost, and that had a massive impact on the harvest of farmers across Saskatchewan, including a lot of my own family members. So that had an economic impact, and it had an individual impact on each of those farmers' status and their health as well. So realizing that, weather patterns are going to be changing, and also seasons, and things are getting less and less predictable. So that's going to have a massive impact on agriculture, which is a huge cornerstone of our economy.
Mm-hmm. And there's really there's no argument for sticking with non-renewable energy. I mean, the only argument I can think of is that it's easier not to switch over, but that's not a very good argument. And I mean, I get that change is scary, but the alternative to changing our energy production is changes in climate, and that's gonna suck way more than having to maybe install some solar farms. Like, a lot of the infrastructure from the existing energy production system can be switched over and repurposed, and a lot of mining is mechanized now, so it's not even really that the job situation would change very much. I'm sure that there would be lots of new positions open in a solar or wind energy sector.
Yeah, I think that transition from non-renewables to renewables has a lot of people in Saskatchewan and Alberta worried that they'll be out of a job, and whole towns and cities are built around these places right now. So, but
someone's going to have to work at the solar plants and the energy plants still, just because things are changing. It just means having different job opportunities, not less.
Absolutely. And we have a finite planet with these resources, so it's not like they can keep doing this for a long time. So we do have to start the transition now.
There's only so much oil.
And coal.
Can't run out of sunlight.
Yeah.
Yes.
I also appreciate, just really quickly, I appreciate that you mentioned how revenue was generated from this project. A lot of people think they would appreciate having oil over renewable energy because it's cheaper. But if you compare the amount of money is required for cleaning up oil spills and other ecological impacts associated with extracting oil, yes, maybe the extraction and shipping is cheaper on one side, but all of those environmental impacts are going to cost us so much more in the end. So I just thought it was important that I mentioned that, and that's important that it does generate revenue. It's just in a different way.
Oh yeah, existing systems are only cheaper in the short term. Switching to renewable energy as our primary source is going to be much more cost effective and profitable in the long term. And
definitely.
The reason that politicians are not super eager to make drastic changes like that is that it's really common for their policies to really only focus on the next 4 years, because that's how long the political terms are. And it's important that we think further ahead than that, because in the next 4 years oil is going to be more profitable than solar, but in the next 40 years probably not. Change is the only constant.
Lizzie, we have you set to talk about urban sprawl a little bit.
Yes. Okay, so I've chosen for my topic urban sprawl, which is a big problem here in Saskatoon, and any large urban city center you can think of may be subject to urban sprawl. So the definition of urban sprawl is the spreading of urban development, such as houses and businesses and shopping centers, on undeveloped land near the city. So basically it just means, rather than growing inwards and infilling areas that are maybe older and need to be redone or revamped, we are moving our city borders outwards into areas that are not already developed. So that could be agricultural lands and of course natural spaces as well. So I just have a couple of statistics on Saskatoon and how urban sprawl is kind of looking here in this time. So on average, our city has a 4% increased growth in population every year. And with that new growth, of course, we need new infrastructure to be built. Right now, 70% of the new infrastructure built in 1 year is moving outwards. It's outgrowth, it's not infill. Whereas if we look at the outward growth between 1996 and 2001, it was only 14.6% here in Saskatoon. So that's quite a big leap to go from that large time span. 14.6% was outward growth, whereas now every year we're outward growing 70%, which seems astronomical and kind of ridiculous. So in order for our outward growth to be stable and sustainable, we need a 50-50 balance between infill and growing outwards. Of course, it'd always be better if we were infilling more, but 50-50 is what would allow us to have a stable growth every year in our city plans. So lots of people are wondering probably why we grow outwards and why we sprawl out into these urban areas. And we do it because it costs a lot less to purchase land that already has nothing built on it, so there's no other buildings around, so agricultural lands and natural spaces. And also the zoning kind of dictates what buildings can be built where, and it is way less specific in areas that are not already developed. So just a side tangent, zoning basically is something that happens within the city, and it's kind of delegating certain areas to be for certain kinds of infrastructure. So you might have a certain part of the city for businesses and retail, and you might have a certain part of the city for residencies and playgrounds. That would be an example of zoning. So in areas that aren't developed, it's so much easier to get the permits to build whatever you want because there is way less zoning and lax protocols involved with that. However, there are, of course, negative impacts from urban sprawl, and those positives definitely do not outweigh the cons. So it costs taxpayers a lot more money, even though it costs the government less to buy those lands, because we need to build sewage system, roads, water systems, and get energy to those areas, whereas those things already exist within, say, the downtown area. So it costs us a lot more money to actually do those things. Condensing downtown would also make it a lot safer for people to live there because there's more eyes on the street. When you think about these new neighborhoods that are surrounded by nothing and agricultural farms, it's a lot less safe because there's not as many people and places around to simply just have watch over you so you feel safe. Second of all, there's also way less speeding in downtown areas and urban neighborhoods because there is no grid roads. In a lot of these newer neighborhoods, kind of like Lauren said, we have freeways connecting them or highways, and that causes a lot more speeding, so it's a lot less safe in that regard as well. And then finally, condensing downtown would also help us stop this kind of donut effect. And what I mean by that is our downtown central area, if we choose not to infill and redo some of the buildings there or knock down older ones and put up newer stuff, it sort of becomes like a ghost town. No one's going to want to live, work, or do whatever there. And instead, we're going to move to the outer parts of the city and have a larger footprint of our city on, of course, natural environments, agricultural areas, because we are in the dough part of the donut around. So we're trying to prevent that by infilling downtown. So that's kind of what urban sprawl looks like if you think of a donut. So developing outer city, of course, like I said, it also infringes on natural habitats. Lauren kind of talked about that in her little spiel about the swale and how we're going to have that road sadly being built through the middle of an ecosystem. So that leads the habitat to be fragmented and animals are prevented from moving around freely and having an undisrupted area where they can thrive. I've noticed in the 13 years that I've lived here, the grassland and of course the swale they've definitely become surrounded and encroached more and more by the new developmental neighborhoods and parks. So the other sad part about urban sprawl is we also see an increase in car culture. Basically, that just means encouraging your citizens of wherever you live to use their cars more frequently to go wherever they need to go. And this is because if you live on one side of a large city and the businesses and shops that you need to go to are on the other side, you need to drive because it's too far to bike, or perhaps those trails and sidewalks don't exist for you to get there through active transport, which would be biking, walking, running, skateboarding, whatever you choose. So there are some things that are going on that are super good that are improving this situation. The Meewasin Valley Authority has a $14 million project they're working on right now around the swale. They're planning on building 16 kilometers worth of trails and 7 kilometers worth of fencing around the swale, which will help mitigate some of those negative impacts urban sprawl is having with the roads and things like that. And a small portion of this project has been completed near the bridge, I believe. I don't think the whole project has been completed just yet. The city also has some plans in their 4-year plan from 2018 to 2021 to implement strategies and encourage businesses to infill downtown rather than build their new buildings out of city limits or into the agriculture and natural areas outside of the city. And they're trying to find ways to have developmental processes and initiatives and maybe some financial incentives as well for those businesses to infill downtown and in those other already built areas rather than spreading out. So there's a couple of things you can do as well. Choose active transit over using your car, because if there's less people using their cars, we're not going to need to build as many parking lots, and we're not going to have as large of a span between different businesses and your home. Because if we have businesses and homes close together, you'll be shopping local and you won't need to drive your car halfway across the city to get to where you need to get to go. So you can also donate to the Meewasin Valley Authority. They do not receive enough funding for how much they do. I truly feel that they are a great community and great committee within the city, and they do so much for protecting our river and natural spaces. Just a quick fact, they receive about half the amount of funding that Wascana Park in Regina receives, even though Wascana Park is about half the size of the area that Meewasin Valley covers. So donate to them if you are able. Of course, if you can't, that's fine too. And a way you could maybe encourage the use of the MVA trails and kind of show your support is by using them. Because they don't receive much funding, if you're using them, it will encourage our city and other governmental groups to put money into those kinds of organizations, because people are using those trails and enjoying those green spaces that exist. And of course, you can always write to your city councilors or any governing body if you have concerns about developmental projects that are going on. I know there's a couple of petitions, I think, going around for swale things and stuff like that. So make sure to check those out if you are concerned about those things. And yeah, that's basically my little bit on urban sprawl.
Something that I think really contributes to urban sprawl is the certain stereotyping that we've been giving to certain neighborhoods in Saskatoon, such as like Westmount or Caswell or Pleasant Hill. They're automatically associated as being the ghetto, and so people don't want to live there. They want to spread out to these newer neighborhoods that are far away from these high crime rate neighborhoods, when truly there's some really wonderful homes and fantastic communities here and it's really not all bad. And honestly, if bad people exist everywhere, not just in these inner city neighborhoods that are so often not really
Yeah, and another thing that really plays into that is also transit, like public transit and things like busing are a lot easier to access within developed neighborhoods. So less wait times and more frequent routes and easier connections can also keep people out of their cars and not having to build those new routes and have even more buses on the road, and just having it be more accessible to use the bus and prevent using cars.
Yeah, and the whole idea of like bad neighborhoods is like, I mean, you know, largely based on racial stereotypes, but also and classism, because I mean, yeah, maybe those neighborhoods do have higher crime rates, but it's because like lower income neighborhoods have more like financially motivated crime, because obviously, and like it's marginalizing those neighborhoods more just makes the situation worse. I mean, I'm not advocating for gentrification, because that's a big problem, and that doesn't solve anything, but I mean, like choosing to, but marginalizing like what one might consider like bad neighborhoods is really just contributing to, you know, worsening said neighborhoods. And on the urban sprawl thing, sorry, I just looked it up because I was curious, but I found out that in 2018, Saskatoon's vacancy rate for like houses and condo, or it might have just been condos, but the vacancy rate in Saskatoon is around 10%. So that's a lot of unoccupied residences, like unoccupied houses and apartments and condos. And sorry, I feel like I've been talking for a long time, but I have just sort of another thing to add on to the like bad neighborhood discussion. But like avoiding those neighborhoods doesn't mean that there's not going to be crime in your neighborhood. It's like, for example, I used to live in Stonebridge, and that's not a neighborhood that you might expect there to be a lot of crime in, but my neighbor's car got set on fire once. So crime happens everywhere. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just that's my story.
I'll just touch on briefly, seeing as you brought it up. I wasn't going to mention it in this little presentation spiel thing, but when you brought up gentrification, so I'm just going to give a brief definition as to what that is in case people don't know. Basically, gentrification means you're building brand new businesses in areas that are maybe have less income to increase the economic value to a place. And Quinn, I'm assuming you're probably against it, because it is true, gentrification does cause those people who are in lower income neighborhoods to move out of those areas. Yes, because they are marginalized, and their property taxes, of course, will go up if there's a new fancy business beside it that creates a lot of revenue, and they can no longer afford to live in those areas. So people, I think, wrongly assume gentrification improves the problem, whereas it just displaces those people that live in those neighborhoods that are lower income, because that's all they can afford. So I just thought I would give an explanation as to why gentrification can be a bad thing, and also kind of what it is.
Yeah, and then like there's a difference between gentrification and revitalization.
Of course.
So revitalization is like sort of the same idea, where like maybe new businesses are popping up in lower income neighborhoods, but the key difference is that it benefits the people who already live there by like the community in general ends up generating more income, and so the lower income residents aren't forced out, but they end up benefiting from the changes.
Yeah, by more sustainable.
Direct tie-in to climate justice too is, we know the climate crisis is going to have a larger effect on lower income people, on people who are homeless. So realizing that all becomes really connected, and in those groups are other marginalized groups that are being oppressed and that are a portion of climate justice, and that will be more affected by the climate crisis unfairly. Nice.
So we're just getting a little short on time, so we're gonna maybe move on to the next topic with you guys. And we'll have some city councilors in for one of our webinar series, so we'll get a chance to kind of talk more about some of these issues with them too. when youth are looking at getting involved, how can they get involved with things in Saskatoon? What kind of opportunities are out there for youth in the city?
Well, I mean, there's
Well,
us.
Yeah,
Come
not
join
to
our
like
webinars.
self-promo here, but we're a great way to get started. And relating back to the activism, not being a perfect activist, there's no one way to be an activist. So you can dip your toes in and see if it's a good fit for you, if you're interested in the community to decide maybe what you want to do. It's great to get involved with organizations like us or Climate Justice Saskatoon, or
We've got connections.
yeah, or attend a climate strike or something where
Yeah.
you can just see kind of what other people are doing, what other people are interested in, and what you can do as an individual. And education is truly a powerful tool, so educate yourself and others, especially in the age of social media. We have a lot of tools at our disposal to truly understand the problem better and address it in that way.
And of course, we're on a lot of different platforms. So if you want to just kind of get a brief understanding as to what we do, we're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And we also have a website as well. I'm sure that'll be posted on the little PowerPoint. But if you want to get a brief understanding as to what we do, or if you have more specific questions, you can always email us at our Gmail as well, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions or ideas or inquiries you have.
That's what we're here for.
You can also get involved. You can be sending emails or letters to your city councilors, officials in your area. You can be educating the people around you that you know. And also keep in mind that if you want to get involved with us, that we're not looking for experts, that it's okay to not have the most information or anything like that. We are just a group of people that are passionate about this topic, and we're doing our best with what we know to spread information on it. So don't feel intimidated.
We are children too. Don't need to be intimidated. Like, we're open to everyone, and like, it's important to know that, like, you know, you're just one person, and like, you have a lot of power, but also, like, participating in the world as it exists doesn't negate any activism or any positive change that you make, because it's impossible. It's almost impossible to live completely sustainably, and like, that's okay. That, like, it's important to try and do your part, but like, advocating for systemic change and like, larger scale changes is really important. And I mean, like, just joining the digital strike online with Fridays for Future is huge, and it doesn't feel like a whole lot, but just spreading awareness is super important, because I mean, information is power. And
of course, you can always make your little lifestyle changes as well. Simple things like bringing a reusable mug when you go get coffee or hot chocolate. Those little things can encourage others, especially when you do things like, I know personally, bring around 2 metal straws with me. And if I have a friend with me and we're getting drinks somewhere, I don't necessarily force it upon them, but I'll say, hey, I have another one of these. Would you be interested in trying? And that way you can kind of inspire others. They're like, oh, it's actually pretty easy to make those little changes that can have a big impact as well.
Yeah, start discussions. It doesn't have to be about a big thing. Maybe looking at how your impact is currently being measured, what you can do to change that. And a huge thing you can do if you're over 18 is you can vote. And if you can't vote, tell your parents to vote. We have municipal and provincial elections coming up this fall, and it is super important that everybody gets out there and makes their voice heard. And yeah, it's something that's your right to do, and it's really important that you use that right, because a lot of people don't have it, especially youth. So that's really important. Start those discussions, write to your officials, and yeah, use your voice.
Absolutely.
And push your teachers, because teachers should be
Yes.
learning and teaching this sort of stuff eventually.
Yes.
And lots do, but we can do better.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a nice segue into the next. It's a nice segue into the next section of collective care. What is collective care?
Yeah, so Warsha was actually supposed to be the one that was talking about this, but I'll kind of do my best to answer that. So self-care is a huge thing, especially in today's culture, of caring for yourself first, and it's a super important thing to do, especially for your mental health and being overwhelmed with politics and the state of the world and all those different things. So not only doing self-care, but doing collective care. So taking care of the people around you and building a community of support, lifting each other up, and really making sure if you are able to help another person out, to do that, to support others, to foster positive relationships and acknowledge that you're not in this alone and that we can definitely help each other out, however that looks.
Especially now with the whole COVID-19 thing going on, it's super important that we're checking in on each other, making sure that everyone's doing okay, because things are very difficult for everybody right now. Everything is really difficult and it kind of sucks. But yeah, it's a great time for us to connect and really band together during this super hard time.
It's also important I mentioned that whatever feelings you're feeling, regardless of where you are in your life or who you are, your feelings are always validated as well. You should not compare your situation and your feelings to somebody else's situation and what they might be feeling about it. Because how you feel is always validated, and it's important that you recognize those feelings and find ways in which you can deal with them, whether that be just by yourself, maybe it's going for a walk, or maybe it's calling a friend or a relative and just having a conversation with them about how you're feeling during this time. And of course, you can always care for the planet as well through caring for yourself. Maybe something that you do to help yourself is gardening or planting nice flowers to look at.
Yeah, and probably one of my favorite things about climate activism is meeting people who are passionate about the same things, that are like-minded, that are motivated, and that really have a lot of the same interests. Like within this group, I found people I can talk to about birds and gardening and other things that the general population might not want to talk about. So I've made so many friends throughout local and national activism to really support each other and realize that we are a community. We're all fighting for the same goal, and we're all fighting in different ways. And one thing about the climate crisis we don't acknowledge nearly enough is the mental health toll. And a lot of people experiencing anxiety and depression around the climate crisis, myself included, and worrying that you're not doing enough. But know that other people are also feeling that, and that there is someone out there if you want to talk, and if you want somebody just even to understand your struggles, there are lots of people out there.
And we're one of them. You can contact us if you have any things about those kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Maybe that's a nice little lead into talking about what's going to be happening for future webinars.
Yeah, so this is a series of webinars, the first in the series. So every Wednesday for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be doing the same kind of thing. Well, not this same kind of thing, but having a different discussion about topics that are really important in Saskatchewan around the climate crisis and environmentalism. And all of those will include members of our committee, so probably some of the people you've seen here today, and other local experts and people in different fields who know a lot about these issues.
Some people who have actual expertise.
Well, you're living in Saskatchewan. You're going through all these things. You do have expertise, and that's I think an important thing for youth to understand is you do have an expertise in lots of different things. So, but yes, absolutely, it'd be a neat opportunity for youth to be able to tune in and ask questions around Saskatoon and get to talk more with this crew here and learn a little bit as well. So.
Yeah, so for more specific topics, I think we're going to be talking about invasive aquatic species, a lot of things around the Northeast Whale. I'm hoping to have more specific about that, and then some conversations with your city councilors and other elected officials where you live who are making those decisions. So lots to look forward to, lots coming up.
Cool. Well, thank you, panel. And we'll tune in for next Wednesday.
Yeah, stay safe and see you next Wednesday.
Go spend some time outside. Get some vitamin D.